So today we're here to talk about a schema that sometimes actually gets a little bit of a bad rap. And usually as a clinician, when you see it elevated on a YSQ, gives you heart palpitations around what that's going to mean for the therapeutic process. Today we're talking about entitlement. Welcome to 7 Minute Schemas. I am Rita Unit.
And I'm Ruth Holt. We're working our way through each of the schemas as part of Schema Therapy's 18 maladaptive schemas. And today we're talking about entitlement or grandiosity and the way that presents in the room and how to work with that. So Rita, it can be a really challenging schema, particularly I think given that some therapists have complementary or clashing schemas.
Yeah, but it might be worth talking a little bit about the origins, about how the schema actually developed. So from Jeff Young's perspective, it could be more around just being spoiled and overindulged, this kind of pure entitlement. And sometimes it's actually born out of extreme neglect. And you find this in forensic patients. So essentially what happens is, as a result of that neglect, the idea of reciprocity is missing, and hence they become quite entitled about their needs when in interpersonal situations.
And I guess there's another kind of way it can present, which is more that fragile entitlement. So where you've got entitlement covering for defectiveness or emotional deprivation. So it's kind of a way of being in the world that keeps that little vulnerable, lonely child safe. So I might have learnt growing up that there's something wrong with me. Maybe I had abuse or severe criticism. And so I learnt to be the best in the class, or the biggest and brightest, or the amazing football, or the bully. So I learnt to be a somebody to cover being a nobody. And when you've got somebody like that who walks into the room, a therapist can find that really challenging because, some therapists have an entitlement schema. So we can kind of get into a bit of a clash of who's the top dog in the room, and we can get irritated or kind of defensive even. For other therapists who have maybe a subjugation or a self-sacrifice schema, they actually might find themselves complying, trying to, obey the commands or please that client in a way that really isn't very healthy.
No, and then what starts to happen for therapists, for example, is that resentment builds in terms of seeing this patient and becoming quite fearful about how to set limits and empathic confrontation. And Ruth, just earlier we were talking about, according to the theory with Jeff Young, that if it's pure entitlement, it's more about setting limits as opposed to empathic confrontation. Whereas when it's more that kind of fragile entitlement that you were describing just then, there's a mixture of limit setting as well as empathic confrontation.
Yeah, and what do you think that would look like, Rita? So say if I've got a client, David, who's a doctor, he kind of is used to people doing what he wants and turning up and people kind of making it okay for him. He might be walking into my rooms wanting, to turn up half an hour late but still have his full hour. That's how life is for him. He might expect that from me. What would empathic confrontation look like in that setting?
So it might look something a bit like this. So David has just asked for us to go over, and something that might be a way to kind of work with that situation in that moment is something along the lines of, David, I'm just wondering if we could pause for a moment. I think something really important has happened here. It seems as though that part of you that demands things to happen to suit you is in the room at the moment. And this is the very part of you that perhaps, gets his needs met at work and people kind of acquiesce and it works for him. But right now in this moment, I think it's really important that this is also the part of you that turns people off, that results in you feeling really alone and disconnected from people that you love and want to care about. And it gives the impression of this idea that you don't care about somebody else's needs. And so it's really important for me to set a limit here, that I have needs too, that I have to end the session on time and have my lunch break and then continue to see the rest of the patients that I have booked in for today. And I'm not saying this because I don't like you or to criticize you. That's the last thing. that I want you to hear it as, but rather that I care about you.
That's really helpful, I think, isn't it? To, you know, balance both the confrontation element, but also the empathy element. So we're confronting the behavior or the mode that's acting in that entitled way, but we're doing it being very aware of that little lonely boy or that little lonely girl in the room who's struggled in life, or defective little vulnerable child. So we've kind of connecting with that part of them, but also challenging the behavior. And I guess that's an important point for us to remember when we're working with people with entitlement schemas, is we really need to be aware of the leverage. What is it in their life that is not working because of this schema? You know, is it that their relationships are impoverished? Is it that they're about to lose their job because they're bullying? What is it that's not working for them? And initially they might not present that at all. They might, you know, be the kind of client whose wife told them to turn up to therapy, or, you know, or be mandated to come. So they're not going to be coming wanting change necessarily. And that's where we've got to remember that leverage part.
Absolutely. And look, Wendy Bahari talks a lot about the idea of leverage when we're empathically confronting patients with an entitlement schema that typically narcissistic patients tend to have. And we're fortunate enough to have Wendy talk with us for our advanced techniques workshop in terms of how to do this with difficult patients like narcissists.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity to practice using that skill with this type of client group. I guess some of the other treatment things you're wanting to bring into the room, particularly with entitlement, you know, teaching some of those assertiveness skills, because typically I think these clients, they are aggressive, and they think if they're not being aggressive, they're going to be passive and they're going to be walked all over. So we're trying to teach that sort of assertiveness skill, interpersonal skills, how to connect and be vulnerable. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we finish? Because we've finished our 7 minutes.
Well, no, now that we're finished, I think we need to wrap it up.
All right. Well, that's 7 minute schemas. We wish you all the best with those entitled clients, and would love to see you at our training. There's details of that at the end of this video.